Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Untitled Reviews, this being a show where I talk about dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the series premiere of The Republic of Sarah. A great series premiere, a lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. I don't know how I would describe this show. Like, it seems like it could be one of those, like, heartwarming shows, and heartwarming seems kind of weird. Like, obviously there's going to be a lot of drama within the confines of the story, but it definitely seems like one of those stories that's kind of nice, of where you have an entire community coming together to fight for, like, it's like, oh, because you have Layden, this corporation coming in, wanting to mine through parts of the town, but also basically making people move off their property. Because what also makes it scummy is because Layden's coming in like, oh, we're smiling, extending hands, we're willing to pay for people's dream houses that they can move into to get off their property, where we're going to start digging. It's like, oh, we're going to start on this part of the town and just kind of make our way in, because the town of Greylock is, like, built on, like, a lot of, like, minerals that it's like, yeah, it goes into, like, a lot of, like, stuff. So it's like a lot of money's, like, could be literally mined out of this town. But we find out later on, Layden already had, like, a lot of this, like, immediately ready, because Sarah's later on being like, whoa, how'd you immediately get it approved? It's like, you guys are just, like, it was a pretense, because it's like, oh, like, a big corporation will come in and will tell people, like, oh, no, putting a smile on their face while they're simultaneously, like, shaking your hand with a smile on their face while they're simultaneously stabbing you in the back, type of thing. In the sense that they just wanted, it was a pretense to be like, hey, we're letting you know this is what we're doing. We were already going to do it. We're just trying to not come off as the evil corporation by pretending like, oh, like, you have a choice in the matter. We're kind of doing whatever we want to. The situation gets complicated in many different regards. Before we really, I'm going to go ahead and finish my point. Especially, I didn't expect that, because I saw Luke Mitchell was in this. I was like, oh, crap. Obviously, this is the first thing I've seen him in post Blind Spot. Interestingly enough, the other thing CW wise is he was in the reboot of To Tomorrow People, because, like, that version of the show was, like, the third adaptation of it. So regardless, tangents and all that aside, but I thought it was an interesting development, because I thought, like, oh, like, I saw him in the previews, I thought, oh, he was just some schmuck that works for Layden. Nah, he's Sarah's brother. I was like, that's such an interesting development. Which, really quickly, speaking of Sarah, multiple things to bring up. For one, the actress who plays her, I'm going to butcher, I believe it's Stella Baker, Simon Baker, the thing I'm best known for, The Mentalist. That's his daughter in real life. I actually think, if I remember correctly, I think in The Mentalist, like, when you did see his daughter, I think his actual daughter did play his daughter. It's always interesting when that happens. But what's interesting to me is the most recent thing, because I don't think I'm familiar with a lot of her work. The most recent thing I saw her in was Tell Me Your Secrets. It's on Amazon Prime Video. It's a really good show. I highly recommend, if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend you check it out. It's a really good kind of crime drama, murder mystery type of. That's not really describing it well, but it's interesting going from that to this, with that, seeing her from being in that to this. I don't want to say too much because I don't want to spoil anything, but it's just interesting going from that show to this show to be like, oh, that's interesting. Also, I went into this thinking she was a student. I didn't realize she was a teacher. Like, she looks young enough to be like a student to me. It's because I think, like, when I initially saw, like, the trailers or, like, the promotional material for the show, like, that's what I immediately thought. But then, like, I started seeing, I mean, it was the same promotional material, but I kept seeing it over and over again. And then at one point, one of the scenes shows her at the front of a classroom. I was like, wait, are you a teacher? And it's like, yeah. I totally didn't catch that from the promotional material. Like I said, I thought she was just like I thought she was like a high school student or something. Maybe a college student. She seems like she's a fairly young teacher. She's like one of those teachers that seems like pretty fresh out of college. She might have been teaching for like maybe a few years, but she's definitely on the young side. You know, I mean, because like, I think it's also because in my head, when I think of teachers, I think of older. Because most teachers I've ever had over the years have been older. Like, I could probably count on one hand them, like, teachers that were like fairly young, like in their early 20s. Like, most were like, there were some in their 30s, some probably in their 40s and like above, but like I've only had like a handful. Like my second grade teacher, Mrs. Smith, shout out to Mrs. Smith, guys, I had the hugest crush on her. And then like in my sophomore year of high school, I had a teacher named Miss James. I was taking a business class and she was like maybe 23, 24. She was like right out of college. I don't know if I don't know if that was like her first teaching gig or not, but regardless. So that's why I'm just kind of like, it still catches me off guard sometimes. It's like, I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of teachers that were younger when they taught, but it's like by the time I got to most classes, those teachers were usually on the older side, like I said. So that's just always like a thing I gotta like fix in my head, because I always tend to, think of teachers being like older rather than like, oh yeah, like having one that's like maybe like 8 to 9 years older than me in my sophomore year example, because I was like, what, 16 at the time, 15 going on 16, and she was like 23 or 24. So it's like, yeah, she's like 8 to 9 years older than me. It's like, it wasn't that crazy. It was just interesting. Like I wasn't quite used to that, Regardless, tangents and all that aside, it was just kind of interesting development. But I do like that this did a good job of setting all that up, but also setting up the dynamics and relationships of a lot of stuff and characters. First and foremost, like, we find out about Sarah and her brother. Like I said, their issues, but also it seems like issues they have with their mom, who I was looking it up before I watched. The actress who plays her mom is Megan. Is it Fellows or Follows? I was like, because I kept looking, I was like, why does she look so familiar? Most recently, she was Mama Earp, or rather Mama Gibson, on Winona Earp. Because interestingly enough, the actor who plays the mayor, he played Eamon in Winona in the fourth and final season of Winona Earp. Well, season 4 of Winona Earp. So I thought that was so interesting. I was like, oh, some Earp, alumni or something like that. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But we kind of find out her, because she was talking about it earlier, because it's like, oh, her mom had a book out and everything, and it's like, oh, she's like, yeah, at least my mom's doing better. I'm like, kind of implying like, oh, at least my mom's not as messy, and I'm like, what is that in reference to? And we find out like her mom is drinking later on when she finds out Danny's in town, and Sarah, it's like, right, I did a lot to get you into that. Like, you were 10 months sober. And she's like, oh, are you going to adjust me? It's like, no, Mom, it's just I did a lot to get you there. And I see why she's kind of stressing it, because as she kind of gets described later on, Sarah's kind of the fixer in more ways than one, especially when it comes to her family, because we find out their mom's has been an alcoholic. I mean, you don't like alcoholism doesn't go away. It's, like any addiction, it's a conversation that it's an addiction for life. You find a way to mitigate it, and, find your way to navigate through life without submitting to your vice. But it's a struggle for the rest of your life. You never just no longer stop being an addict or in any shape or form. But we find out their mom was abusive, and it seems like Danny's potentially the older sibling, so he caught a lot of that. Because they didn't touch on it this episode or anything. We don't know whether or not Sarah caught any of that. And I think that's also why because Sarah asked later on, why do you not ever, I get you won't have any relationship with Mom. I get that. I understand that after everything you went through. She's like, I remember the stitches you had to get when Mom threw a glass at you, or the bruises you had. But it's why'd you cut off ties with me? And Danny doesn't answer. I assume it has to do with the fact is that it's you stayed. It's rather than leaving, maybe for him it's I left and you decided to stay in Gray. You decided to stay by Mom's side, and kind of despite everything. Even she acknowledges she's trying to help her mom. I think for Danny it's probably don't help her. In his mind it's probably no, our mom's a monster. Don't help her. She's a terrible person. She wasn't a good mother to me. Once again, we don't know what her relationship was with Sarah. I mean, maybe because Sarah was there to witness the abuse that her brother suffered. So I'm curious, did she receive any of it? Because I think, sadly, sometimes that could be that one child receives most of it. It could still be that Sarah got some of it, but just maybe it wasn't to the severity that Danny got it. But it's that was a storyline. I was whoa, I wasn't expecting that. That was actually heartbreaking to find out. But I think that's why Danny probably doesn't, being around his sister probably is a constant, it's for him it's just a reminder of the past. I love you, sis, but you are a reminder of why I had to get the hell away from Gray. I had to get away from all of this. I had to get away from our family. Especially because they bring up later on, it's because he's don't tell me you're here at Dad's Rock, he's never coming back. That doesn't seem like a he's dead thing. Maybe it could be. I feel like if it was, it would have just been straight up, oh, he's dead. I think he walked out at him, so that probably led to a lot of stuff about their mom. I'm sure that played a role into her alcoholism and everything. It's just her own, not being able to properly deal with her own life. She lashed out. She drank and then lashed out at her kids. So I think that's where it is. But it's not just some drama there. There's the Corinne thing as well. It seems because Corinne references like Danny did something. It's like you did something to me, you did something to Stella. I don't know whether it's just the leaving and abandoning, ghosting us, or whether it's actually something more. It makes it sound like it was something more severe to the point that people in Greylock hated him, but Corinne's the one that kind of tried to defend him time and time again. It's like, wait, you don't understand what he's been through. Like what he went through when he was younger kind of molded him into what he is. But it definitely seems like they're setting up that her son Josh might be his. At the very least, you can tell he's kind of getting the hint of like, especially later on in the episode when he's looking at the picture, it's like he's wondering whether that's the case. Like before he abandoned her, like was she pregnant? And he never. For her, it's like, I waited for you, and by the time, like, it's like you never came back around. I think for her, it's like I was trying to give you your space to kind of figure things out, and you come back, and you never did. You never came back to fix what you broke. So she probably never felt the need to reach out to be like, hey, you have a son. Because I think Grover was giving her orders like, oh, this is for you, this is for your hubby. So it's like, okay, so she's married and everything too. So I think resurfacing of like some old feelings and kind of past love, I think. That kind because the moment like Danny popped up like in the meeting, Corinne was kind of had this look on her face. So I was like, the town hall meeting, I was like, so that's made me think like there was something there. It's like it seems like there might be something even deeper, especially with the whole Josh thing, but we'll have to wait and see. There's the whole Luis thing, him and Maya, because she's kind of a new transfer in town and stuff like that. Obviously Hunter being the douchebag, being like, oh no, I don't think she speaks English. It's like, shut up. It's like, there you have to get introduced to your tool bag. I'm hopeful that it's a thing of like Hunter gets introduced as a tool bag, and it's like, no. Actually, like he comes around and he has his redeeming moments. I hope it's just not like, oh, you're just. I mean, he could just be the full blown series. Oh, you're a douchebag from beginning to end. I mean, even to the point that Sarah's like, oh man, like some people could do to learn to restrain themselves and not talk about much. I mean, it do you such wonders. To have that Hunter, and like she clowned him like that. Once again, she definitely seems like the younger, like very, especially you could tell by her style, like how very like she was at a punk show and she's like all sore from like the mosh pits and stuff. So you can tell like she's definitely on the younger side, in that regard. And speaking of Corinne, I love that whole conversation about like, it's like, oh, you and Grover, which she's like, Grover's my best friend other than you. I don't want to like ruin that, especially considering everything he went through. And it's like, oh, the ball's in his court, whether anything happens there. And Corinne's like, yeah, his balls will be in your court. And she's like, what? Even I'm like, Jesus, I can't believe you said that. That's hardcore. But we kind of find out, because we see at one point Grover's arm, they focus on, he has the tattoo saying patience, but we kind of find out later on, it's like, oh, he was married. Because it's like, because he had talked about it before, like he's not willing to open up his heart because it happened before and he found love and it broke his heart. I was wondering like whether the person he loved walked out on him, but it seems like no, they died. What the circumstances are, we don't know. I'm assuming because the person died in 2019 that it's like 2020 or maybe 2021. Like I don't know like how. I'm sure like. I would because I was about to say like I would assume like the show was like filmed in like 2020. Maybe it was filmed earlier. Maybe I would assume. You never know what productions are like and stuff like that. So I'd assume like, it could have even been a thing of like they have it set like a year in advance of the production. So it's like, oh, it was filmed in 2020, but they like have the show set in 2021. Like I know some shows kind of do that type of thing. But yeah. So there's that. So obviously I'm talking about a lot of the character stories. Right, going back, I kind of went on a huge tangent with the whole Maya thing. Her and Luis, that's a complicated thing, because she's kind of forced to move to Greylock because she's from LA, because her entire life is there, her friends are there, but then it turns out she's kind of forced to be here because Luis is her dad, because apparently her mom's in jail. We don't know what the hell that was about. I was like, oh, they quickly threw that in there. I'm like, what did your mom go to jail for? But it turns out Luis is gay, and he didn't know at the time, and it's like, you kind of just abandoned us after you realized you were gay. He was like, I didn't. Your mom and I came to the conclusion it's best to go our separate ways. And she's like, for who? So she's missing home, but she also resents him a little bit because it's like, you weren't in my life. I don't really know you. I was forced to be here because, like, you know, she's not young enough to be on, she's not old enough to be on her own, so she kind of had to go live with her other parents. So there's some resentment in that lane of things. But obviously getting into the nitty-gritty of, like, the meeting and stuff like that, I thought it was interesting because the mayor had to spin what at the town hall meeting, Danny was very like factual about like, oh, this is going to happen, this, and then the mayor had to be like, oh, but good things are going to happen to the town, right? And Danny had to be like, yes, you're right. Our success is your success. But then Sarah started calling him out, and other people being like, could that stuff that you're digging out, is it going to be toxic? Those conversations start happening. So it didn't go the way that Danny was kind of hoping, but Danny is almost smug about it. It's like, yeah, like, oh, this worthless town with these worthless people and their worthless lives. And like, it's like, and then he references their mother, and then like, I wasn't expecting it. Sarah like punches him in the face. Even to the point later on, like in the episode, it's super visible. Like, oh yeah, like he's got a red mark on his face. Like, oh, she got you good. But even to the point, she's standing in front of the construction because they're starting it immediately, and she gets in front of the vehicle. So it's like, no. And it's like, oh, with all this stuff around, it's not going to look good, especially because you work for a publicly traded company. And like, oh, there's going to be videos of you running over a teacher. Like, are you going to be okay with that? She's, making her stand because like so many people will be displaced. You're going to cause so much harm to this town. It's like, it's just the thing of like, we don't know enough information. This Leiden is moving too quickly, to get this done. And then like a senior, VP or something, or I think a senior president in the company shows up, and it's like, it's like, oh, like she was talking down to him. Lucy was like, you don't have to talk to us like that. And she's like, I don't have to talk to you. And I was like, okay. So I think Danny's supposed to represent like that borderline evil corporation guy that kind of can come around. Like eventually with the right motivations and turns in the story, he can be swayed to kind of lean more towards Greylock. But I think it's also like he has his own personal vendetta against the town. The town hates him, but also like there's a lot of terrible memories. So I think maybe in its own way you can make the argument him destroy, like trying to upheaval this town, kind of changing it is his way of kind of, it's almost like a visual, like a more literal like manifestation of like dealing with his trauma and his issues with his home life. Like you can make the argument he's literally trying to like the past that he buried, trying to like reshape it and just buried it under something else. It's like, oh, let's build some other stuff. Like this, he kind of wants to destroy the town on some personal level, just because it's like middle fingers to like my hometown and just like all the trauma I have associated with it, But Sarah, gathers up her friends. It's like, we got to find a way to stop all of this from happening. And so Sarah, Luis, like presenting like something he was working on, kind of gave her the idea. And it's so interesting because like, I guess she's a history buff. I guess that's like what she teaches, like, because she was going over a lot of history. And once again, I think it's neat when teachers are able to like, because I had a history teacher who, he taught a different history class, but there was like a younger history teacher who did kind of make pop references as like kind of explaining like U.S. history. Like he took over our class for like a couple times over the course of my junior year. I believe this was my U.S. history class in high school. So she kind of reminds me of that, kind of using like, oh, like this so-and-so, it's kind of like a colonial Jason Momoa. She made some other reference too. I'm blanking on right now, but once again, it's just like moments like this kind of take me back. It's like, man, because also too, I think it's also like, right, if you're unaware, like I'm 28, so it's also like these actors, like these characters are like, these teachers are probably younger than me, like the character wise. I'm sure the actors are probably maybe about the same age, but as me, but and so that's why it's just kind of interesting to like think of me with my mindset and who I am. I mean, to be fair, I'm just in a different lane anyway, but just imagining someone like me being a teacher, it's so, that's another weird thing about it. It's like, right, that'd be like me being a teacher. It's like, God, you don't want me like polluting the minds of the next generation. Hell no. I wouldn't be a good influence. It's just like, plus I have no patience for kids. It's like, nah. It's just interesting to think about. I don't know, like, younger kids will be a nightmare. High schoolers might be even worse. Once again, kids can be dicks. Teenagers can be douchebags. I remember being a douchebag as a teen. The memories. Regardless, going on a huge tangent. But I really thought that was really interesting, like, how Sarah ends up breaking it down. Like, basically where Greylock sits, basically, like, that was, like, the late 1800s or something. There was, like, basically dividing up what would eventually become, like, Canada and North America. So, no, Canada and the U.S. Because I was about to say, stupid, like, Canada's part of North America. But the point I was about to make, it's like above a certain point was like Canada, and below a certain point was the US. Greylock sits in a particular spot where it's like, loophole wise, they technically don't belong to the US, so they can actually kind of bid for independence, because it's like, technically we don't qualify. You know, you'd have to be a part of like the union to succeed, because technically we don't qualify. So that was an interesting development. And it's like, you know, what are we going to do? Like, become our own country? She's like, no, this is just to give us enough time to kind of stop the mining process, and that way we can actually find another way to actually fight, you know, Leiden on better terms. So they start going around knocking on doors, like trying to get it. It's like basically they need a majority vote on this. Obviously the mayor, because it is that complicated thing of like, yes, like it is like you're upheaving and changing a lot of people's lives, but at the same time, a lot of the money that comes from this can do a lot of good for the town as well as the people. So it is a give and take. There's good, there's bad. There's always pros and cons to anything. But this is one of those situations where it definitely seems like maybe the cons outweigh the pro, but that could be an element of the show as we see, where it's like, oh, you're fighting for independence, but what about me? I'm struggling. I need this money. Like, are you going to help pay my bills? You know, to be able to live a comfortable enough life that I want to live. So like, you know, a bid for independence isn't copacetic for everyone. And I think that's definitely something we can definitely lean into more of, like, you know, weighing both sides of the options, trying to find, you know, things aren't so black and white, try to find that middle ground, that gray area that kind of works for everybody, I think is where we're going to potentially end up. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how that ultimately ends up playing out. But like it's because I said, like the mayor's got certain backings from other people to try, you know, so him in particular, Danny's going out trying to convince people to say no to staying and just kind of like letting Leiden kind of do their thing, while Sarah and them are trying to get them to say yes to staying and just kind of fighting Leiden's, you know, push. But then like one of what's her name, Marilyn, essentially Danny's boss, shows up and she digs up a whole bunch of all that dirt about Sarah and Danny's mom. Interestingly enough, that's where it's revealed, like, wait, like, well, because later on when she's on TV and stuff like that, I'm like, wait, she's a senator? I was like, wow, I didn't realize that. That's interesting. And I guess in some shape or form that kind of influences where Sarah's situation ends up being. But basically, it's like, yeah, here's like case files and stuff about what your brother went through. A lot of it was buried because she was a senator, because some of it took place during like her senatorial. Like, I think she's no longer a senator. I think that's kind of like she's post all that, hence like the book and all that, I think. But Sarah got pissed at Danny because she's like, oh, you told all that. But it's like, no, like, it's like, for him, it's like, and he ends up explaining later on why he went to his mom, because he's like, we need to talk. And he got her to confess on TV. It's like, yeah, there's no love lost between them. Like, obviously he has no, like, not wanting her in his life, but still wants Sarah in his life. And he's talking about later on, a fair fight is one thing, but my boss digging up dirt like that, kind of pressuring you into not taking it, like, yeah, I don't want you to go down this independence route, sure, but I'm not going to scum it out to the point of like using that dirt. Like, that was a low blow, you know. But if it's a fair fight and we win, cool. Like, you know, that's what he wants, you know. So I thought that was kind of an interesting development. You know, once again, kind of, despite the complications, slowly but surely, Sarah and Danny are mending fences in their relationship, especially as things kind of progress. I have to look into it. The mayor's wife, she looks so familiar. It also seems like she's having an affair with Sarah's buddy, who's like, I believe she's the sheriff. She might be a deputy sheriff, but I think she just might be straight up the sheriff. Because like when they were at that soccer game, they were giving each other's looks, and it was like, oh, like, that's interesting. Like, is that just supposed to be like a maybe there was something there between them, like she might be a local, and it's like her and the mayor got married. It might be like maybe she never came out of the closet, so it's kind of like an affair in that regard. I don't know, but the glances definitely tell you that there's something there. So, but ultimately, when everything, you know, Sarah was having reservations about all of this because she doesn't think she could really do it, because she's kind of being put in like a leadership position and she doesn't like that, because she's like, who am I to lead? But it's like, you know, the fact is that Sarah's doing all this shows, obviously she cares about this town, she cares about its people. Like, if you're willing to put forth this much effort, it showcases that you are kind of the right person for it. And so when the votes come down to it, a lot of people are like, yay, the independence. But then Mayor's like, oh, I quit. I'm not going to be a part of this. You know, once again, it's it's not just him being a d-bag. I mean, maybe we'll find out there's some like douchey reasons why he doesn't want this, but it might just be like, no, I'm trying to do what I do believe is best for the town, you know. So, but it's like, okay, do we even have a mayor? Like, what happens now? And like Tyler's like, oh, I think Sarah should be mayor, and it's like, she's like, no, it shouldn't be me. But then everyone backs her for it, because it's like, you are the right person. You got this all started. We believe in you. You're willing to give this fight. So yeah. Which, speaking of Tyler, like, I like the thing between him and Bella. I think was kind of cute. Well, for first and foremost, the Hunter thing, him leaving Bella like out in the woods, because she's like, well, I want to slow down. He's like, you don't want to be the only one of your friends that's a virgin. I'm like, okay, and you don't want to be the peer pressure douchebag, but and you can't help yourself. And so he ends up leaving her. It's like, oh, fine, be like that, bitch. It's like, okay, once again, hopefully he has a turnaround, but hey, maybe he'll just stay the resident douchebag the entire time. But I love, like, she's walking, he's like, and Tyler rolls up and is like, oh, you need a ride? And she's like, I don't want to get in the car with strangers. She's like, I'm literally in your AP class. I'm Tyler. It's like, oh, I don't. The fact is, I didn't even know. That's kind of messed up. It's like, yo, we're in the same class. You're talking about I'm a stranger. Like, okay, like don't know me at all. It's like, we're literally in the same class together. Probably have been for a while. That the fact is, you haven't taken notice. I wonder if that a real group, a tribe called Red. That's interesting. I am not aware a lot of the. You know, actually, like, I've only become slightly aware of that because obviously, like, Trickster, the TV show, ended up showcasing a lot of native music as well in that regard. So, like, that's my first exposure to that. Like, it's so interesting. It's because it's not a one for one, but it's like country music to me. Like, not in the same vein of just like, it's just like a world I'm not familiar with. So like, you see like country stars popping up, you're like, I have no, like, the furthest my brain goes is like Reba McEntire. That's all. Like, when I think country music, I think that, you know. I guess like Billy Ray Cyrus, but even then, you know, it's just like my mind doesn't go that. So it's like that's a territory of music I'm like completely unaware of. You know, because I mean, it's just like, I know a little bit about K-pop. I know a little bit about Japanese rock just because of anime. That's like, but those are like my only wheelhouses in those respective situations. So it's in a similar vein to that. But I was like, oh, that's interesting. Even the fact is, he knows a ballet, and she's like, "Whoa, you know about this particular ballet person?" He's like, "Yeah, don't judge a book by the cover." Like that little cute moment between each of, and even later on, like Hunter, he's standing up to Hunter for her, being like, "You know, stay away from like, referencing like Bella as a bird." He's like, "She's not a bird," and then like Hunter like pretending like he's gonna punch him, and then like Tyler being the badass, like not flinching, and he was just being like, "Oh, this kid's not whatever." Blah, blah, blah. And he's like, oh, Hunter, next time you call me, because he was like, you essentially calling something derogatory, and he's like, next time you call me that, like, I'm gonna land some punches that are going to actually land. I'm like, yo. So that was just kind of neat. Like I said, just introductions to a lot of characters and kind of their stories. Since I referenced him earlier, Grover was kind of like, Corinne did say like, yeah, no one can really understand what you've been through, but you and Sarah would be great. Like, only good things can happen. Only good things, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But that's the complicated thing of like being best friends and then become. I've never been in that situation where I've had a best friend become a significant other. I have a really good friend when I was a teenager, which we're still friends today, that I kind of had a thing for, and there was something tiptoeing towards that, which I'm kind of glad I'm not on the friendship level with a lot of my exes. Some cases things just ended badly, other cases just the way the world worked out and we just never stayed in contact. But I think I wouldn't have my friend today if it was a thing of like me and her actually ever became a thing. I don't know. Especially back then, how I handled being friends with exes. I stayed friends with exes immediately after us becoming, after us breaking up, and I never gave myself time to recover. I'm going on a whole tangent. This ain't about my relationships and stuff like that, my relationship history. But it just makes me think of like, right, it's understandable to have those concerns and everything. I've been talking about this a lot longer than I thought it was going to be. No shot against the show or anything. I'm just like, wow, I went a lot deep diver into, well, I also went in like a whole bunch of other tangents, but yeah, I just went into the deeper dive than I thought it was. But I think that's just the interesting thing of like just so much actually being packed in just the first episode, because there's so many questions about where things can kind of go, like what certain stories can go and stuff like that. So it's just interesting in that regard. What did surprise me, and I didn't see coming, her getting arrested, and I was like, whoa. It's like, yeah, because you're basically challenging the authority of the country. It's like, I guess the loophole or not, it's still, I'm sure like Maryland and like Leiden had something to do with that, but I'm like, the fact is that that's still like, I don't know. I guess you'd think maybe her mom being a senator, that could probably help her out a little bit later on when it comes to like getting her like released or whatever, but it's like, that's interesting that she's getting like reprimanded because it's like, right, you are like trying to succeed. You're going against the authority of this country and stuff by doing that, even though she's working with the loophole that exists. But I guess it's like the technicality is like, no, we're not acknowledging that technicality. You're breaking the law and stuff like that. So that was an interesting development. So, I mean, I think it gives a little more national attention to their situation in Greylock, so that's an interesting thing because I think this is going to be like the first of its situation in many regards, so like I said, a great first episode. I'm really interested to check out where the rest of the season ultimately ends up taking us, but really that's all I'm going to talk about. So next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.